Mr. Ruwindhu Peiris is a former chairman of the Sri Lanka Association of Software and Services Companies. He's also the managing director of Stax and a member of the National Innovation IT Steering Committee appointed by the government to position Sri Lanka as the island of Ingenuity. Mr. Peiris, please.
Thank you. Excellent. Good afternoon, guys. My job's done, I think. Man, how do you beat falling in love in Sri Lanka? I mean, that's your soul right there, right? I'm going to get you guys through a quick good afternoon. Great to be here. Privileged to be amongst this great crowd. I know I'm in between you guys and the break, so no pressure in terms of getting through this. You know, I think to what Chris mentioned, as well as kind of as you saw in the brief video that was shared, I think we're at a very interesting juncture right now. Quick introduction to myself. I'm actually born in Canada. I'm a dual citizen, chosen to be in Sri Lanka for the last 20 years. And it's been a phenomenal ride. It's been an unbelievable opportunity to kind of go back home, as I call it. My parents are from Sri Lanka, obviously. And I've been just amazed at the amount of growth and the rate of change that Chris alluded to, that our country has been able to really kind of take on and actually surpass back onto the world. And I think what I want to highlight is a lot of you guys will see, and I'll share a bit more examples of how large companies, global entities are really the leading edge of this, right? So they see change happening, they see disruption happening, and will be the first to embrace it and really look at countries and places to be able to kind of help them leverage that. But I think the biggest opportunity, and I think for a lot of you guys in the audience today, is you probably don't fall into those billion-dollar companies, right? And some of you do, I know, but there's a vast majority of SMEs out there. And that's where the big game is. And that's where I think Sri Lanka fits in so perfectly well, right? And this statement really, talks to this. The future of where we are right now and the next few years are not about the big fish. It's about the fast. And I think what I'm going to share with you guys is how Sri Lanka is so well equipped. In many ways, we've peaked at the right time, right? If you look at what we've done over the last 30 years, we've really kind of created an engine that's able to really deliver some amazing innovation and ingenuity that right now is being leveraged by companies across the world. But I think it's now time to kind of really embrace and have some of the SMEs and the next level of companies come in and really take advantage of that. So what's our approach? What really stands out about Sri Lanka, right? There's a lot of stuff. You heard the stats, you heard the numbers. But I think to me, it really kind of falls down into these key simple things. And it really starts with the fact that we're problem solvers. At heart, we're innovators. And if you look at the term, it was interesting, I'll share the story, as we kind of went through our branding. We've done some amazing stuff for the last 30 years, but until about 2 years ago, we didn't have a way of presenting ourselves to the world. So a bunch of us, group of the industry, came together and really kind of brainstormed and figured out what's going to be our brand, what's our brand identity, how do we take who we are to the rest of the world. And there's a lot of debates about the name, right? Island, and there's a lot of kind of connotations about it means small, it means lazy, it means island culture. Do we want to have that in the forefront? And we said, you know what? Let's embrace that. That's exactly what we are. Not necessarily the lazy part, but what brings out about the laziness is the fact that we really enjoy life. We know what matters. And I think as a result, you'll find our ingenuity is in our DNA. We're not about doing the unnecessary. Our country is predicated on doing smart things and making sure that we spend our time wisely to enjoy life's great pleasures that we're abundantly blessed to call our home. And that shows in our work. And I think as you'd see in the testaments that you heard up to now, that innate ability as the human characteristics of Sri Lanka brings out in everything that we deliver. And I think that's something that underpins really the whole industry that we represent right now. I think the smallness of being able to really innovate, and what the world's asked, if you look at the last 20 years in IT, it was really about the cost arbitrage. It was fundamentally about saying, hey, how much money can I save? I want to kind of do it for cheap on the dollar, and let's outsource large scale, fight. A lot of the next future is going to be about pure automation. Chris spoke about this. And right now what the need is, people are looking for thought partners. They're looking for people who are going to come and challenge them and help disrupt and really reimagine a new future. And that's something that you're going to find in the next few slides that I share, how Sri Lankan teams are really being able to partner with their companies and their partners globally to be able to kind of take different industries that are going to be disrupted and help them reimagine what that future is going to be. And that really is something that I think the country has to offer. So there are three things again. Three is the magic number in terms of what we want to present as to what you should look at Sri Lanka for. And I'll walk through in a bit more detail, but fundamentally, I think the biggest opportunity for all of you guys as you look at Sri Lanka is to think of us as either a captive innovation center, your digital gateway to Asia. We spoke about the gateway to Asia, but I think fundamentally around it being a digital gateway to Asia, right? And also being able to invest in some of the most up-and-coming digital disruptors. The intellectual property that the country has. Harsha mentioned a few amazing companies that are really taking our products to the rest of the world. They're coming in, and I'll tell you right now, they're coming in at a very cheap valuation, if I may say. And that's not going to last too long. But right now, and I'll give you a few examples where people are being able to come in and really get into these investments at a very lucrative valuation right now. And they're paying off tremendously. I'll talk about a few examples where Indian investors are really coming in and really kind of playing the field right now because they see these are global disruptors that they're able to kind of take part in at the right time. So captive innovation centers. Really, I think if you look at the next while, as I mentioned earlier, in the next few years, it's going to be about in each industry being able to kind of dig deep and understand what's going to be disrupted. Either you're going to be disrupting yourself or someone's going to come and disrupt you. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the large companies are already ahead of this, but there's another whole layer of companies that are really requiring to kind of look at their own businesses and really figure out in small chunks. And a lot of the times, I think a lot of the apprehension is, how do I go about doing this, right? And I think what Sri Lanka provides is a whole host of mechanisms to be able to take that journey. It could start all the way from sometimes just having a service provider who would give you out a solution with 5 engineers. So if you're not ready to kind of come and take the big leap of saying, I want to set up my own company in Sri Lanka, there's multiple companies that are very good at interacting and working with companies that'll be happy to say, you know what, let me take a particular project on for you and let me help you in that disruption area. So it's a more defined, specific area. After a while, you might come back and say, hey, you know what, but I want to have this as my own team. I want to be able to brand it as my own core team. So there's a model called the build, operate, transfer, right? And in fact, one of the companies that has done this really well is a company called, in fact, it just bought Edexcel recently, Pearson, a global company, the world's largest online education company, has 1,300 engineers in Sri Lanka, which started off, and I happen to know the story because I was working at a company called Virtusa at the time, and it started off like that. It was a company called eCollege that started off with a team of 20 that I happened to manage, came in on a build, operate, transfer agreement. We hosted the team within Virtusa, helped grow the team out for 5 years, and at the end of the 5 years, we had grown it up to be about a team of 50 that then got transferred into eCollege. eCollege got bought by Pearson, and Pearson then bought Edexcel, and now, as you know the story, there's 1,300 people in Sri Lanka right now disrupting the whole online education mechanisms. That's just a mechanism of how some of these stories grow up. It's not necessarily day one, come in and let me be 1,500, whatever. And there are some of those which have happened as well, but I think a lot of the success stories in Sri Lanka have been a lot more organic, a lot more relationship-oriented. And I think that is really where it differentiates. And to be very specific, I think if you go to a company like, if you go to a country like India, which is obviously known as the mecca of IT, the opportunity cost is too high for some of those companies to be able to entertain a conversation like that. If you're not of a certain scale, you're not going to get the best people. And in this business, it's all about the people. And I think what Sri Lanka has to offer is that we are at the right scale, at the right intensity, to be able to make sure that you get the right talent at the right price point. And I think that's really what differentiates Sri Lanka as a captive innovation center for the next layer of companies that are wanting to come in. I'll run you through a quick example of this. And how many of you have heard of Cisco? It's the world's largest food company, right? Classic example is where it actually started off as a product company out of Sri Lanka, right? It was called Cake Labs, right? This really talks to the ingenuity and the potential of Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka is also a great ecosystem that allows you to, and anyone in the industry knows, in IT, two things matter. You need to fail fast, and you need to fail cheap. And if you do those two things successfully, you become a success. And that's what Sri Lanka really provides. As a system, and in the food industry, what the team did was they scouted out and said, hey, you know what? There's an opportunity to disrupt how the payments work in the food industry. So they went out to create a product. And in Sri Lanka, it's a pretty small community. You could figure this out, built out a quick prototype, managed to get it out into the market, went through the prototyping, then positioned the company towards opportunity in the Silicon Valley. They grew out very fast. And interestingly, how they came across Cisco was when they were looking for funding. They went to a private equity firm. The private equity firm asked, what do you guys need funds for? They said, really, my biggest problem is the product's great. There's a huge demand. My cost of sales are very high. I need to be able to distribute this product as fast as possible. So I need money to be able to do sales and advertisements and to be able to get distribution. So the guy said, well, you should speak to this company called Cisco, because a lot of the companies that you want to sell your IT product to, they also have access into, because they're selling food products and equipment into them. Long story short, they went as a partner to be able to kind of go into them and do a joint venture of accessing the market. Very shortly, what happened was they bought into the company. They invested more than 60%, then they bought out the company. Later on, what they did was they actually said, you know what? You guys are so good in terms of doing what you're doing. For all of Cisco, which is a $60 billion company globally, they said, farm to fork, I want you to help me disrupt how I look at this industry. And today, there's close to 1,500 engineers. They have about 1,300. They're going to get to about 1,500 who are going to be enabling Cisco globally to be able to go on that journey. So I just want to kind of share that quick story of how it started as an investment and now quickly turned into them mapping out their whole innovation center in Sri Lanka. Digital gateway to Asia. I think this has been spoken about earlier. There's a huge opportunity, and I think as we all know, Britain, you guys have been amazing at taking on new worlds. In the era where it meant about conquering new geographies, physically going sailing in, and really kind of enabling. On the digital world, it hasn't happened as aggressively as it should be, at least from UK. And I think there's a great opportunity to change that. And I'd like to invite you guys to really leverage Sri Lanka as a base to be able to do that. To be able to service, as we mentioned earlier, the large population that exists in Asia. There's no better place than coming and setting up your office in Sri Lanka. The earlier point relates again, fail fast, fail cheap. The ecosystem in Sri Lanka is very replicable in most of the, whether it be India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Indonesia. You think about servicing a digital product. The characteristics of the Sri Lankan market mimic very much those same economies. However, you're able to try out and proof of concept your product in a very fast manner, very cost effectively, that allows you to fail fast and fail cheap, and then be able to take it out. And a classic example of that being done, and in this case, it wasn't a small company. It was a company called IFS, which is a Swedish company. It was actually the sixth ERP company at the time. I think they've now gone out to about the third. They've just got invested by a private equity firm who's been very aggressive, buying out a whole bunch of other companies. Similar story, they happen to have a captive innovation center in Sri Lanka. Again, I think it's northwards of 1,200 who do their whole code development of their product out of Colombo. In fact, they share the same office space that my company's at, and multiple other places. But the point that I want to make about IFS is that they were predominantly in the banking and oil and industries. Those are the segments or the industry verticals that they had the ERP focus in. But they found that they were not as relevant into the Asian region that was fast growing in ERPs. And the area that they wanted to get into was in the apparel manufacturing. So what they did was, because they had a development center in Sri Lanka, is they actually innovated and started working very closely in developing their ERP product in the apparel industry with the likes of MAS, Brandix, which are the world's largest, and Harsha alluded earlier, doing some of the most complex garment manufacturing, and partnering with them in terms of how do they make their ERP product a lot more vertically integrated and relevant into that industry. And that was the only reason that they were able to actually now go into Bangladesh, and now they're dominating the market in that whole new vertical. So it's a classic example of where Sri Lanka has become a gateway to Asia in terms of a digital product by being able to innovate in the constructs of Sri Lanka, but then being able to go out to other much larger economies. And as mentioned earlier, it's not about the 21 million economy in Sri Lanka, but leverage that, use that as a platform, and then be able to take it out into the much larger opportunities. And the last area, or the third opportunity, I think, is really around, as I mentioned earlier, being able to invest into digital disruptors, companies that are really changing the course of the world, really thinking of new ways of how the world's going to operate. This ability to kind of reimagine, take new areas of focus, and being able to innovate and create new intellectual property that, at this point in time, is at a very reasonable valuation, and people are able to come in and take on. And I'll share one example of this. It's a company called WSO2. And really what these guys are doing, I'm not going to get into technical, but in short, they're really trying to kind of compete and contend with the likes of IBM. And as bold as that sounds, this team is out from Sri Lanka. It started purely Sri Lankan. They have offices globally right now. In fact, it's an open source. For those of you that might be from the technology area, it's extremely innovative, because also what they've done is they've leveraged open source capabilities. And they've got globally people contributing to these open source platforms that they've kind of architected, but they provide a mechanism of wrapping those around and being able to create what they call a middleware. And it's one of the fastest growing. Gartner's reported them to be in the Magic Quadrant and doing really well. And as you can see, they got invested in. Toba Capital's invested. They're on a huge journey right now. And a classic example, and one of the prides of Sri Lanka in terms of one of those really high-tech digital companies that are trying to kind of change the course of how the world operates in the technology sphere. So, in summary, why Sri Lanka, right? I think we spoke about this. It's robust, niche talent base. Over 50% of students completing, and I think this was alluded to really well by Chris. I don't need to kind of spend too much time on this, but also around the basis that this is something that we're investing very heavily. We're making sure that this is not just something that we do today. There's a huge program of Kids Can Code. We're working in the schools. We're making sure that kids who are between 10 to 15 years are really engaged with the industry. SLASCOM as an industry body is really active in this across the country, not just in Colombo, but in the outskirts, whether it be the Northern Territory, whether it be the South, Kurunegala, the Central Province. Huge activity to make sure that we continue on the programs and make sure that our future generations, our children, are really taking on to this and making sure that they are enabled. There's a huge, strong industry foundation. I think very robust legislative and infrastructure mechanism, strong support from the industry. SLASCOM is an industry body that's come together and very supportive. And you'll find later on any one of you, and I'll be here in the evening as well, happy to speak to any of you guys. We've created a portal called Island of Ingenuity. It has all the mechanism. It kind of is like a one single portal for you to be able to come in and engage anything that you'd like to know. We do a bunch of industry reports around salary surveys to mechanisms. There is co-working spaces available so that you can minimize your capex, really converting it to more of a OPEX mechanism so that you can test out working in Sri Lanka in a very effective manner. And I think just to mention earlier around the tax part, to do the numbers and the math, really it works out, although that there is a 14% tax on business. When you take into account the 135% deduction on employee cost, if you do the math, roughly, if you're doing a services company, about 60 to 70% of your cost is really your human capital cost. So when you work out the numbers, effectively you're paying about 4%, right? I think the math works out to be about 3 to 4% depending on, It's a huge thing, right? So I think the takeaway is really to do business in Sri Lanka in this sector, you're talking about a 4% capital.
It's going to be expanded tech sector, total tech.
Absolutely. So I
On top of that, you have the R&D double deduction also.
Absolutely. So, I benefit from this as well. We have offices in Boston, New York, and Chicago. I allude to the fact that it's been, absolutely, no problems at all, being able to bring money, take money out, very conducive. So, absolutely. World-class infrastructure, I think, hopefully Jeremy will allude to this earlier. I think we, in some ways, are really spoiled. If you think about the digital infrastructure, we are the innovators in Sri Lanka around mobile technology and tech infrastructure. I think you said we're the 7th cheapest in terms of, sorry? Oh, anyway, in the world, yeah, in terms of the cost per GB, and whether it be 4G technology, 5G technology, we happen to have the luxury of really getting exposed into that very early on. Sri Lanka is viewed as kind of the epicenter of where a lot of the latest technologies really kind of trialed out and rolled out first. So as an industry, we really kind of take advantage of that. A very robust industry, infrastructure in terms of latency, in terms of just the cabling, everything's really working well for us. And then I think, finally, in terms of high-value opportunities, right? If you think about whether it be even the rental cost, and a lot of times people kind of compare this with India, and if you think of a tier 2 city in India, we're probably the best value for money tier 2 city. And we kind of really view ourselves in that sense. And there's a lot of Indian companies who've actually come in and set up their backup centers or their next-gen centers in Sri Lanka because they view it as one of the most cost-effective mechanisms when it comes to tier 2 comparisons of cost to infrastructure cost to rental cost. So there's real savings in terms of really coming and setting up. So that's it. Happy to take questions as we kind of have the evening over, and we'll take it from there. Thanks.